Hi, I'm Susan Michel. I was 20 years old and I attempted suicide twice. I dumped 6 bottles of sleeping pills onto my bed. I ingested them one handful at a time until I had 6 bottles of sleeping pills in my system. And at that point, I realized I didn't really want to die. I just wanted to kill the pain. When I was in elementary school, I was bullied severely. I was on the playground standing all alone while all of the other children were playing in groups. I always felt like an outsider. I had a few people that picked me out, and there was this one boy, a heavyset boy. He was our neighbor, and he would always mock me and make demeaning comments towards me whenever I saw him on the school bus or around the school. And there was another girl, Marie, who was always stepping on my shoes, and so my feet would come out of the shoes and she would laugh. I think that stemmed from the fact that I was so shy, which is why I was bullied. I think even the bullying in school started from the verbal and emotional abuse that I received from my father. It was not sexual abuse. There was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse that I internalized. Feelings were not accepted in my family. So because I had so many emotions inside of me that stemmed from the abuse that I received, I also had no way to process these repressed feelings. I had no tools. I didn't know how to process them. So because I was abused, the feelings were stuffed in my unconscious mind. I think that's what led to the depression that I experienced off and on for years, which ultimately led to my suicide attempts at the age of 20 years old. I have my childhood pretty thoroughly psychoanalyzed, and I have spent a number of years in therapy, which has been very, very helpful for me. I think the emotional healing is almost as important as the spiritual healing. I could not express myself. I felt very contained, and I believe this again stemmed from the abuse that I was receiving at home from my father. I remember in the hallways, I walked around with my arms covering my chest. My back was slumped over. My head was down. I was scared of people. I was scared of life. I remember when I got home, I would just scream sometimes because I was so angry that I wasn't able to express myself. I believe my mother did the best she could to help me, but she also did not have the emotional tools that I needed in order to process the pain. Well, as I became a teenager, I started acting out a little bit. I became attractive, and I thought that if only I could look good enough on the outside, I would feel better about who I was on the inside. So I went through this long process of plastic surgery. I got my breasts enhanced, my nose straightened, I lost weight, I worked out. I decided that if I could be a model in the magazines and I could look good enough on the outside, well, then I would feel better about who I was on the inside. I was looking pretty good at the age of 20 on the outside. I got a top Boston photographer to take some pictures for me, and I looked very glamorous in all these pictures. I took the pictures around to the different modeling agencies in Boston. I started with the third best agency and they said no. And then I went to the second best agency and they said no. Then I went to the top Boston modeling agency and they accepted me into their agency. And then even though I attained my goal externally, I still felt just as bad, if not worse, internally. And that's when I chose to commit suicide, because I saw no way out of my pain. I had a waitressing job in Boston, and I have always been a very hard worker. So I remember I used to work really, really hard as a waitress. I remember standing in line, at the grocery store, just scouring the magazines, which I think a lot of young people do. And when I saw these glamorous models on the cover of the magazine, to me, they just looked so happy, so confident, and I wanted to be like them. I did not accept who I was. I wanted to look like the glamorous models on the front cover of the magazines. So I decided to get some work done on my nose to make my face more symmetrical. And then in terms of my body shape, I've always been in pretty good shape. However, my breasts and my hips were not proportionate. So I didn't want to be top heavy, but I just wanted a perfectly symmetrical figure. So I decided if I can get my breasts enhanced and my nose straightened, well, then I'd be good to go in order to get some photographs in the magazine in order to become a fashion model. I went to a plastic surgeon in Framingham, Massachusetts, and he agreed to do these 2 procedures for me. But after the procedures were done, I really looked good, better. And that's when I took the pictures for my portfolio, and that's when I took the steps that I needed to take to become a model. So a few months before I tried to kill myself, I looked better than ever on the outside. But it didn't matter. It just didn't matter. From that really horrific experience, I say in life, everything's a lesson or a blessing. Well, that was a huge lesson. I learned that no matter what happens on the outside, we need to feel at peace within the inside first. I started modeling with Maggie Inc. was the name of the agency in Boston that I was working with, but I did not feel like I was able to hold a candle or compare with the other models that I ran into at the photographer's studio, at the castings. I just did not feel good enough. And it was very stressful for me to go on these auditions and follow the instructions that the agency had given me, because I did not feel good enough. What happened was I quit, and then I got really down on myself for quitting. I started eating a lot. I started sleeping a lot. I put on 50 pounds in a couple of months because I just ate so much. I did whatever I could to escape what I was feeling. Like I got so down on myself for quitting. That's something else that happened. I worked so hard to become a model, and then when I was a model for a month, it was very stressful, and then I quit. I ate, I slept, I smoked. I used to smoke a lot of cigarettes. I gained 50 pounds. I went from 120 to 170 within a couple months. I felt so horrible about myself because at first I was looking really good. Now I wasn't looking so good anymore. I wasn't feeling good. I wasn't looking good. In my mind, I planned it. I went to the local store and I got 6 bottles of over-the-counter sleeping pills. I put them in my drawer. I made a date for myself that I was going to ingest the sleeping pills, and I dumped them on my bed that morning. For the first attempt, my mother was in my parents' bedroom across the hallway, and I remember hearing her in there. And I did feel a little guilty knowing that my mother was so close because she knew I was depressed, and a couple weeks prior to my suicide attempt, she said to me, if anything was to ever happen to you, it would kill me. That's what she said, because she knew I was depressed, and I was very close with my mother. So I did have guilt. I proceeded to go through with my plan and ingest the 6 bottles of sleeping pills. And then I remember lying in the bed, I felt relief that all of these pills were inside of me and I could finally escape all the pain that I was in. And then I imagined my father lying over my dead body in tears. And I so badly craved a relationship with my father. I so badly craved his love. Even with all the abuse I endured from him, he did love me. He loved me very much, but he just didn't know how to show that love. So in my head, as when I had those 6 bottles of sleeping pills in me, I imagined my father lying over my dead body in tears, and that would make the attempt worth it, I thought, until a few minutes passed and I realized I really could die, and I got really scared. And then I ran across the hallway to my mother's bedroom and I told her what I had done. She couldn't believe it. She was shocked. She says, "No, you didn't. Why are you lying to me?" "No, you didn't." And finally, I kept telling her that I did. She finally did believe me. She was so scared, and I was just had kind of this adrenaline rush because I realized what I had done. So we got into the car. My mother was driving, and we drove to the hospital. My mother said to me, "Do you want to stop here?" I just said, "Okay, yes." I ran into the urgent care facility. I told the nurse what I had done. They did not have the equipment to pump my stomach at that facility. So the nurse said to me, "We're going to have to call an ambulance to take you to the hospital because we can't pump your stomach here." And then I started getting really nervous. And I said, "Am I going to die?" And the nurse looked at me and she said, "I don't know." And at this point, I realized my suicide attempt could go through, and I was really, really scared because at this point I didn't want to die anymore. Then the ambulance came to the urgent care facility. They drove me to the hospital, and they were able to pump my stomach in time to save my life. Well, the doctors sent me home, but I still didn't have the necessary tools to get myself out of the depression. So I continued to overeat, I continued to oversleep, I continued to smoke and do anything I could to escape the pain. And then just like Groundhog Day, the same scenario repeated itself, but this time my father took me to the hospital instead of my mother. And I remember his response to me was, "Well, if you want to kill yourself so bad, just go ahead and effing do it." But he did drive me to the hospital. We didn't stop at the urgent care facility this time. And I got my stomach pumped a second time with no physical repercussions. But because this was the second time I did it, they kept me in a psychiatric unit. They did not send me home. So I was in a psychiatric unit for a few months. until I was released. After I was released from the hospital, I stayed in this depression for quite some time. So after a few months, again, I was released to my parents' care, and I went home. I stayed in bed. I ate. Every so often I would have a little, I think. I smoked cigarettes. I spent a very long time trying to escape what I was feeling. And then in my early 20s, at this point, I guess I was about 175 pounds. I wasn't looking very good on the outside. I still wasn't feeling very good on the inside because I hadn't done the work to process the emotions. But I decided killing myself wasn't working out very well. I knew I couldn't spend the rest of my life in my parents' house in my bed. So I just pulled myself out of bed. I got a job at a local restaurant as a waitress. I joined a diet plan. I remember it was Nutrisystem. I started the Nutrisystem diet. I started working out. I just, I guess, pulled myself up by my bootstraps because I needed to get out of bed. And then I started feeling semi-normal again. I think I had to go through this forgiveness process, self-forgiveness, because I had made so many mistakes at that time. Again, I say, was it a mistake? I don't know. Everything in life is a lesson or a blessing. And there were a lot of huge lessons that I was learning in my early 20s. So I took off the extra weight, the 50 pounds, almost as fast as I put it on, because I've always been a very focused person. I have always had a very disciplined mental attitude, which is a positive attribute that I got from my father. He was like that also. So I took off the 50 pounds. I was working. I was working on forgiveness and forgiving myself. And then by the age of 25, I was back to looking like myself and feeling better. And I decided to give modeling another shot. So I moved to New York City. I began my career as a commercial print model in New York City. And that's where I found Marianne Williamson, who is the most well-known interpreter of A Course in Miracles. And a friend of mine invited me to a Marianne Williamson lecture on in the Times Square area of Manhattan. And everything she said made so much sense. That's when I found A Course in Miracles, and I feel like that's when my growth began, because I found A Course in Miracles, which was my spiritual body of knowledge that I had been searching for. I also started with a therapist, a psychologist, and I did a lot of internal digging into those feelings that were buried in my unconscious mind that I needed to take a look at so I could process them and bring the darkness to the light so I could heal them. And then what's interesting is one of the first self-help books that I read was The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. And he spoke about how the negative self-talk is such a hindrance to success. So once I became aware of this negative self-talk, I started changing the negative self-talk in my head. I started realizing or taking note of the thoughts that were going through my head, and I started changing them. I am good enough. I can do many things very well. I love myself. I changed my negative self-talk to positive self-talk. However, even though intellectually I became much more positive, what happened was I still wasn't feeling those feelings that needed to be felt. So even though I was thinking positive thoughts, my life did not reflect those positive thoughts back to me because there were a lot of feelings that I was too scared to allow myself to feel. And then after that, what happened is I started really stepping into my pain, not only intellectually being aware of the pain, but emotionally owning the pain. And it was through owning the pain that I saw changes start to occur in my life. Now, to intellectually become aware of the pain was a start, but to allow myself to embrace the pain was how I found that healing occurred. I found A Course in Miracles at approximately the same time as I started therapy. But this time when I was in therapy, I really wanted to be there. I wanted to find out what was stuffed in my unconscious mind that was blocking me really from having an intimate relationship with a man. It was a process. I would go to therapy. I would go to different self-help groups. I would study A Course in Miracles. But even though I still had ups and downs, at least I had the tools to work through the unhealed emotions when they came up. I no longer felt hopeless. I still went through a lot of pain in my life. However, I never felt hopeless. I never felt like I wanted to kill myself. I am the author of the newly published book, Surrender to Joy, From Suicide to Serenity. I have my book right here. I just published it on Easter of this year, 2023, and it is entitled Surrender to Joy, From Suicide to Serenity. I teach the transformational truth of A Course in Miracles. I teach A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles is a non-dualistic thought system. In the introduction of A Course in Miracles, it states, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. I have done quite a few podcasts. I've been a guest on different podcasts. I speak live on YouTube and gather for A Course in Miracles twice a week. I talk about my book in different group settings. And I really love teaching A Course in Miracles because we always teach what we need to learn. And when I teach it, I learn it. And to embody the truth is the most amazing way to feel the peace, love, joy, and happiness of God. I think the most important thing to do is get help. Call somebody. Don't do it. I had done when I was on the bed with the 6 bottles of sleeping pills. I wish I had just reached out to someone before I did it. So if we're in the midst of darkness, reach out to someone. If you're feeling suicidal, reach out to somebody. Call a hotline. Reach out to a friend. Just do something. Forgiveness is so important. And ultimately, all forgiveness is self-forgiveness. When I forgive my brother, I'm forgiving myself. When I forgive a decision I've made in the past, I'm forgiving myself. Forgiveness is so important. And then gratitude. So it's all really very beautiful. And I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my book. I'm grateful for A Course in Miracles. And I'm grateful for my time here with you.